And he said, well, because, you know, my estimation, you really don't have what it takes to be a makeup artist. And I just said, okay, thanks, bye. Like, what do you say to that? Your hero, the greatest makeup artist that ever lived, just told you you suck. What got me started in the monster making business? We have to go back to when I was a little kid. My mother died a week after I was born, and my father brought me to live with my grandmother while he worked. And my grandmother introduced me to a lot of black and white movies that she went to the theater and saw, like Dracula, Frankenstein, King Kong. And I was fascinated by the monster movies, and she would explain who the actors are. One of her favorite actors was a guy named Lon Chaney Sr. He was known as the Man of a Thousand Faces, and he would change his appearance from film to film to be a completely different looking character. And for some reason, for a little kid, that really resonated with me. And that was kind of the beginning. There was also a book called Movie Monsters by Alan Ormsby. It was a little scholastic book. And I don't know how it got in the house. I don't know who bought it. But as you know, I can remember 3 and 4 years old just looking through the pages, and there was a picture of Lon Chaney, Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, Frankenstein, the Mummy. And that really stayed with me. So, you know, parents, be careful what you have lying around your house, because you never know how it's going to affect your kids. Coming out to California, I had no aspirations to be a foam runner. I wanted to be a sculptor. Where my real experience running foam was on the Santa Claus at Amalgamated Dynamics, which is where I met Andy Schoenberg, and a guy named Brian Moore was in the foam room, who I had read about in magazines, and he was the foam runner, and they asked him, you know, you need some help, and he goes, well, that new kid seems like a pretty decent guy, let's have him in there. And that really started because every day you would just constantly run stuff, and again, through repetition, you just started to get better and better, at least I did, because anybody can follow a formula. When things are going right, that's very easy to do, but when things go wrong, it's how quickly can you isolate what the issue is and then course correct and change things to figure out what the problem is to get a good run out, because time is money and you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. And just from being on the Santa Claus, I just seemed to have an affinity for this process. And from there, I worked on Jumanji, Tremors 2, Mortal Kombat. But I was at ADI for years, and the largest foam run I've done to date, like the single largest foam run, and this is bigger than any of the runs I did for Jurassic Park 3, was the brain bug for Starship Troopers at ADI. That's still the biggest single foam run I've ever done.
And then bounce up, Mark. And strike.
It was on Alien Resurrection. I was running the alien feet, and I was trying to figure out a way to make the bottoms of the feet denser, tougher, and I'm getting into some technical stuff here. I apologize if I bore anybody. But I started experimenting with just brushing foam latex and that hadn't been whipped up and gelled and using that. And then I thought, well, do I really need any foaming agent for that? I really don't. So I would take the foaming agent out, but I would have the base and the curing agent, the gelling agent. And I started doing that, but what was frustrating was having to do it in multiple layers. So I thought, well, if there's a way I could make this stuff just like peanut butter, I thought I could put Cabicil in that, which is a thickening agent. So I would get a measure out base, measure out some curing agent, I would stir it up with a stick. I would put in some Cabicil, so it would become like peanut butter. And then I would put in some gelling agent, and I would mix it all up by hand, and then I would just brush it in like peanut butter and get a thickness and get like a sneaker sole thickness. And that was one of the things I've done and I've used since then for things like horns or teeth or fingernails. I can do multiple densities on a single foam run. So that was pretty neat to work. And I don't think anybody had ever, maybe they have, but I don't think anybody ever put Cabicil in foam base and gelling agent and curing agent. So I think I'm the one that invented that, but I don't know. The last film I saw in New York before I drove to California was Jurassic Park. It was June 11th, 1993 at the Poughkeepsie Gallery. I brought friends and family. I was leaving for California a month later, and I'd been waiting a year for this film to come out. The island was doing dinosaurs and this new computer stuff, and Stan Winston went. I'm like, Stan Winston's making dinosaurs? Like, this is gonna be awesome. So I remember at the end of the film, I'm like 22, I just stood up, and it was everything I wanted the film to be. And I declared to my friends and family that I'm gonna work on the sequel. Now, mind you, at that time, I had a better chance of being abducted by space aliens than working on any Hollywood film, let alone the sequel to the biggest film of that year, the unannounced sequel. So I moved to California, I started working, and I did get a call to work at Stan's on The Lost World. And it didn't work out because I was already working on Alien Resurrection at Amalgamated Dynamics. And so I thought, yeah, you know what, I was asked to work on it, but I chose not to. Cut to 3 years later, I'm working at Stan's, and I was working on don't remember if it was Galaxy Quest or Austin Powers 2, The Spy Who Shagged Me. That was what I was hired for. And a forklift comes in the bay doors and they bring me these big molds. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, oh, didn't you hear? We just got greenlit for JP3. We got a year. And I'm like, no way! So what was great about that was I was able to, through my experience running these giant foam skins, work with these animatronics and giant hydraulics that were just massive. And Stan allowed me to dress up as one of the dinosaurs and chase people around on set. So that was a dream come true. So I brought some pieces with me today as far as things I have, and I've collected stuff over the years. But one of the coolest things is when I used to go to Dick Smith's house in Larchmont. I went to school in Westchester, and I had found Dick Smith's phone number, and I had called him when I was 15, asking him for Rick Baker's address, which was a dumb thing to do. And he's like, he was in the middle of something, and he's like, no, Rick's not going to call you back. Like, what? Is there anything else you want? I'm like, no. And he's like, okay, bye. And he hung up, and I'm like, oh, I totally messed up in front of Dick Smith. I was crestfallen. And then over the years, I, picked myself up and I started sending him pictures to try and qualify for his course. And after the first set of photos I sent, he had called me back and said, I got your photos. It was some crappy tissue paper and latex zombie thing. It was awful. And he said, I see that you have some artistic ability, but do you have any other interests outside of makeup? And I said, not really, no. Why? And he said, well, because, my estimation, you really don't have what it takes to be a makeup artist. And I just said, okay, thanks, bye. Like, what do you say to that? Your hero, the greatest makeup artist that ever lived, just told you suck. So I moped around the house for about a week. And then I said, you know what? Screw you, Dick. I'm going to prove you wrong. And I started working very, very hard, and I kept sending him stuff. Anything that I thought was worthy, I kept sending it. And I really didn't get that much better, but I think I wore him down. I still have the letter where he says, I accept you as a student. Please understand you have got a long way to go before you're a professional level, and I was like, great. So I started calling him, and we started developing a rapport, and he invited me to his house a few times, and I would drive out to Larchmont. And I got to meet him and his wife, and I got to spend some time with them. And then when Dick he was moving from Connecticut to Florida. He was kind of retiring to Florida. He was getting rid of all of his stuff. And he was having a shop sale, and I had finals that day, so I couldn't go. So I went the next day when nobody was there. So I got to spend the whole day with Dick going through what was left. And it was like vultures, and I was like nothing. But I would take, Dick would blow his nose and throw it. And I'm like, you're gonna throw that tissue out? Because I'll save it and I'll put it in a box. Like, I was obsessed. But what it did was there was also a pile of molds in the driveway. A mountain. And he said, that's, the Larchmont dump is coming, just take whatever you want out of there. So I loaded whatever I could in my car. Like, the wheel wells were like scraping against the wheels. There was so much stuff in there. And then, I drove home, and I had this collection for a while. It was in storage. I donated the bulk of it to the Academy Museum and some really neat things, but I still do have some items, some smaller stuff, and I ran some foam out of them today so that the students can see how the master actually did stuff. And the first thing everybody's gonna say when they look at his pieces is, my God, they are so thin. That his stuff was so thin, but it still did the job. It wasn't too subtle. Like, I thought, wow, this is really not gonna make a change, until you put it on a life cast, and you're like, oh my gosh, it does, it's perfect. So I think that's very important to see and actually handle pieces that were generated out of Dick Smith's mold, so you can actually see what he worked with. So Spectral Motion is a wonderful shop to work with. I've known Mike Elizalde for 30 years. We first met on the Santa Claus. He was a mechanic, I was the foam runner, and I got to know him because I'm asking about the skins and the densities and stuff. And when he opened Spectral Motion, I was already working, but Rick Baker had just ended, and a lot of people went there. And the great thing about Spectral is they are not afraid to try new things and look at it. There's a famous quote by Wayne Gretzky, who was one of the greatest hockey players that ever lived. He's called the Great One. And when asked, why are you such a good hockey player? He says, I skate to where the puck is going, not to where it's been. And I feel like in this industry, you have to do that. I can cite examples going back to the 30s when Jack Pierce would do the Frankenstein makeup. He had a very specific way of doing a buildup. And then when foam latex came out and generating it out of a mold, Jack Pierce wouldn't change. He said, this isn't makeup. This is generating stuff out of a mold and putting it on. You have to build it up every day. But you could do a Frankenstein makeup in 90 minutes instead of 6 or 8 hours, which is what Jack Pierce has meant. So he was fired. So that was, like, whoa. And I think the industry, you have to change with the times, whether you like it or not, it's here to stay. And, you know, I think, you know, back to also, you know, classical sculptors like Michelangelo, he did things with a hammer and chisel. If he had power tools, he would have used them. Some people are like, oh no, he's still great. I'm like, no, he wouldn't. Like, he invented his own tools. Like, you're always looking for things to make things better and to add tools into your artwork. So anytime there's something new, like when silicone came out, that was a new process. And we're getting to a point right now where digitally scanning and 3D printing has proven to be an invaluable tool. There will always be life casts. There will always somebody, you know, and some kid in their basement is going to have to get alginate and do it. You know, it's still going to be there, but it's going to be much less. Embracing the new technology is critical, things like Photoshop. And what also helps is having training in the traditional methods. Not just learning the new stuff, but knowing how it was done before will help with this new technique and this new knowledge. You'll have a much better concept of the application. But Spectral is on the cutting edge of doing this technology, and we are doing scanning and 3D printing now quite a bit.